Hi, guys. Welcome back to part two of this episode where we are going to be talking about a bunch of different things.
Welcome to the College of Valor, where we empower truth seekers with the art of reason. Hope is the motivation, truth is the goal. Everyday valor is the practice, better living is the result. So, in the previous episode, we were talking about the idea, the paradigm, that there are ways that lead to life and ways that lead to death. And it sounded pretty binary. And so we went over a beautiful song and discussed how the ways of death can be very deceptive and how the ways of life can be so rewarding, but it seems so binary. So we were starting to introduce the idea that life isn't usually that simple, right? It's not just black and white, it's black, gray, and white sometimes. And so today we wanted to dive into how life can be complex, how it can be difficult to sort the ways of life from the ways of death, and then some tips, some ways that might help you so that you can better ascertain for yourself what is life giving or maybe death causing in your own life. So that's it in a nutshell. Lots of things.
Yeah. All right. I love that. Let's dive in.
Okay. Well, I agree that life is not always simple. And when we oversimplify life, it gets us in a lot of trouble. So, leading out with that, we can't always say that life is black or white, right? It can be more confusing and more complicated. So I want to be careful because I am asserting that there is a paradigm, this very useful paradigm, that there are ways of life and ways of death. That's pretty binary. But let's talk about a little bit more of the middle ground, perhaps, that life dishes out to us, just to help us, I think, to better interpret life versus death. One thing that happens often in our modern culture is people use situational ethics in their decision making. Situational ethics to determine whether something is a good move or a bad move. And I don't like situational ethics because, and I've said this before, it is my personal conviction that there is one absolute truth. And before you get defensive, I don't believe that any of us have it yet. So I believe it is a pursuit that we can all pursue the one truth that is. And there's the idea of people climbing different sides of the same mountain, and if they were to describe their experiences and what they see, they're going to have very different perspectives because they can't even see where the other person is. They're on the opposite side of the mountain. But the higher they climb, the more they see of the entirety, and they begin to understand each other's viewpoints. And at the top, they join each other with a 360-degree view, and they go, "Oh, that's what you were talking about. Now we see." That's the way that I
Yeah.
believe truth is. Each of us, we have a personal pursuit of understanding and of truth, a personal journey that leads us toward that pinnacle of absolute truth. I like that paradigm. I believe it to be absolutely true. And I know that there are philosophies out there that disagree with me. And one of those is situational ethics. So, boy, Lydia, do you have an example of situational ethics?
Oh man. Well, the only one that I can think of is kind of sad. But um I'm not sure if I want to mention that. I guess it's just like situational ethics is generally taking into account the circumstances that you're in and looking at good versus bad through that lens of that circumstance instead
Hmm.
of perhaps taking a step back, and instead of looking at it through that microscopic lens, you kind of back out and look at the macroscopic picture, the bigger picture of what's going on, and um having your good versus bad ethical perspective based off of that instead of the specific circumstance.
Yeah. You know, I think I have a couple of examples. Here's one. I just said I don't, and I guess it was in the last episode I said that I don't believe that there's a middle ground between truth and a lie. But a lot of people might say, well, it's wrong to lie, obviously, except if telling the truth is going to hurt somebody else, then maybe it's better to tell a little white lie rather than hurting someone. Or another example might be the truth is going to be too hard for me to deal with in this situation. I think that if I fudge a little bit, then it's going to be easier for everybody involved. I can kind of skirt this issue and not have to deal. That's kind of situational ethics. It's like, when is a lie okay? That would be situational ethics. And if you watched our episodes on candor, then you know I don't believe a lie is ever okay. Candor is telling the truth in love is the course. It is the path forward, always. I don't believe in little white lies. I don't think there's ever a reason that justifies lying, even if you think you're doing it to help other people. It's only going to cause harm and confusion and chaos. So that would be one example of situational ethics. Kind of related to situational ethics is this idea that, well, it's okay if you don't get caught, right? Because the situation was, yeah, I did something that maybe I wasn't supposed to do, but no harm, no foul. I didn't get caught, right? That's not really situational ethics. Here's one that's really hard, and this one is sad, but I'll just say it. Euthanasia. That's a situational ethics question.
That's the one I was going to say.
Really? Well, I'm going to say it. And people say it's wrong to murder, it's wrong to kill. The situational ethics would say it's wrong to kill unless, fill in the blank, someone is suffering really badly, someone is dying already, someone has such a poor quality of life that it's just not worth living. Where do you draw the line? At what point does murder become mercy? And I'm going to throw out, in this regard, modern medicine has made this very, very difficult because they can keep a body literally electronically ticking when the body's already dead. So the delineation between living and dead has become very, very difficult, medically speaking. And so that blurs the conversation and the interpretation, but that's kind of situational ethics. Other forms of situational ethics. Should we go into kind of the environmental thing, kind of parallel to the lion story, Lydia?
Sure.
Well, the idea is that the two schools of thought with ecology and environmentalism. One school of thought is that humans are the problem, that there are too many humans, and that we are encroaching on nature's ecosystems. We're taking away habitat for living things, and that humans are kind of like a virus or a parasite that are draining the earth of its great diversity of life. And I see that as an extreme oversimplification. And in a way, it's situational ethics because it sees nature as good and humans as bad based on what humans have done when they abuse nature. So that kind of makes sense, right? But there's another perspective, and that other perspective is that nature is good and humans are good, and that humans are a part of nature. And because humans have intelligence, we have the ability to reason, the ability and the power to do that. If we value nature properly and realize that we are a part of nature, then we can live in harmony with nature, care for nature, and value humans and value nature at the same time. And in the end, we can probably come to some conclusions or some courses of action that benefit both the diversity, the beautiful, wonderful diversity of nature, and humans. So we don't have to say that humans are bad and nature's good. There was about 100 years ago, there was a belief system that nature was bad and humans were good. Nature tried to kill humans. We had weather, we had predatory animals, we had challenges just to survive. And so nature was the force that was evil and had to be battled against. And from that came a lot of the abuses of nature that, we deal with today, because that mindset lasted a little bit too long and humans started harming nature. So when you talk about
Yeah.
situational ethics, when is something wrong? When is something right? Has a lot to do with your own life experiences. But there's another way. And we don't have to judge whether something is wrong or right just based on the circumstances. Rather, we can reach down into a hard and fast ethic, a sense of right and wrong, and make decisions that are good for everybody, that based on a real sense of morality that helps us to interpret and understand and sort out how best to move through situations. So
Yeah, that's so good.
it's not always easy, though. I think I want to read this, Lydia. I have a little paragraph here that's talking about what I was just saying, but it might help just to read it. And then maybe you and I can unpack it a little bit.
It sounds great.
Certainly, the courses of action we take in life are predicated by circumstances in part. But we can also choose actions that align with our moral convictions, even when it's difficult to do so. Remember candor, for example? Matter of fact, if one's actions contradict their moral convictions, then the resulting cognitive dissonance is very damaging. Many decide there's no good or bad in an effort to alleviate the dissonance. But that doesn't work either. Without a schema for evaluating relative worth, people flounder. How does one make meaningful decisions if there are no criteria on which to decide? See the problem? While we do not want to be judgmental toward others, life is composed of a continuous series of critical judgments. These judgments are required not only for survival, but also for success and achievement. Those who judge wisely tend to have the greatest success. Kind of a
Ooh,
lot there.
mic drop.
Boom. I think that the main assertion of that paragraph is that we don't have to have cognitive dissonance, and we don't have to sacrifice our sense of morals or ethics or our values to do so.
Mm-hmm.
It means that sometimes we have to do difficult things. But I feel like when one does what is right, even when it's very difficult, then in the long run, they achieve the best outcomes. What did you get out of that, Lydia?
Oh man, the cognitive dissonance piece really stood out to me. And for those of us that don't know what cognitive dissonance is, it's kind of like your train of thought or your logic is a little bit interrupted or inconsistent, especially when it comes to like your beliefs or your attitudes or even your behavior. It's kind of just all over the map. And I was just thinking how interesting that was to try to um when you don't have cognitive dissonance, then all of a sudden your life is more aligned with wisdom and good judgment
Mm,
and um then through that being successful. So I just thought that it was really highlighting the importance of um, thinking well and thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what your behaviors are, what you believe and why you believe it, and how that can feed so much light and goodness into your life, and that can feed into other people's lives as well.
Yeah, I agree 100% there. I want to pose a situation. Now, this is generic, but I've experienced this in my life. I think, Lydia, you probably have, because it's common to humanity. I mean, everyone's done this. Let's say you're in some sort of a situation, and you find yourself in a pinch. There's a very uncomfortable situation. And so you kind of spontaneously act without thinking it through. And as soon as you do whatever you did to try to alleviate the situation, you get this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, oh crap. Have you ever felt that way?
Oh, yeah, it's the worst.
That is cognitive dissonance. That's when your actions did not align with your values. That's why you got that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. You did something that in retrospect you regret. It's very, very damaging. And people that live with ongoing cognitive dissonance normally end up in some sort of a mental pathology. It's very, very damaging. It's just so much better to do things that are in alignment with your convictions. And situational ethics leads to cognitive dissonance, because you're allowing the situation to dictate wrong and right when you know better. You know better in your
Mm,
heart,
yeah.
right? So anyway, I'm not a fan of situational ethics, but that said, life is messy. Remember, we're talking about that life is not always binary, right? But there's another situation that always troubles me, and I see it quite a bit actually in debates about what is going to be the right thing to do socially. And I want to read another thought here, and then we can talk about it. Many normative social ethics prove out favorably in over 99% of situations. It's incorrect to argue that the less than 99%, maybe 1% of the situations where the ethic struggles justifies the elimination of the ethic from social acceptance. Let me say that one more time. It's incorrect to argue that the 1% of the situations where the ethic struggles justifies the elimination of the ethic from social acceptance. This all or nothing argument fails because it's overly simplistic, and the 1% should not rule out the 99%. Rather, it makes more sense to call it what it is. Normative approach A works 99% of the time. In the 1% of exceptions where approach A struggles, we may need a more thoughtful and careful approach, but the 1% does not justify the condemnation of the 99% success of a normative idea. This is pragmatic. Nothing is 100%.
Mm.
What does all that mean? Let's put that in simpler terms.
Um, yeah, if you want to clean something, you should still use the sanitizing cleaning wipes, even though they're only 99.9% effective.
There you go. That's funny. You know, what I have found is that people that want to change social norms, and some social norms need to be changed, don't get me wrong, but people that want to change social norms like to look for examples that are extraordinarily rare as a reason why the social norm is unjust. I'm calling those people out. You can't do that. You can't do that. Instead, you can pull out that rare situation where the social norm fails. And you can say, in this situation, this thing that works almost all the time doesn't work very well. So we're going to have to deal with this separately in a different light than we normally would. That's the right approach. There are some circumstances that don't have any clear paths forward. You can't tell what's right or wrong. You can't tell what's, most advantageous even. It just turns into, we have to do the best we can with love and grace and forgiveness and mercy and move on, because we just don't know. But I, for one, grow very angry, and anger is the right word, when someone takes a rare situation, the 1%, and uses it as a club to beat the rest of us.
Yeah.
I feel like that is inappropriate, and it's not a valid argument, because there is an exception to every rule that has ever existed. We shouldn't destroy things that are valid and life-giving just to excuse the exceptions. That's what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a 99% that is feeding light and life into the world. Maybe the 1% is a dark thing that needs to be dealt with separately, but there's still a lot of light there.
Yeah. And like I said, there's not a clear path forward. Quite often, there's not a clear path forward in these 1% situations. But I think maybe I made that point. It's again related to situational ethics, and it's again saying that life is not always black or white. There's a small percentage, a minority of the time, when we just don't have the answers. And you know what? That's what it means to be human, and that's okay.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
I'm going to tell my pyramid story, Lydia. People
Okay.
people think pyramid, they think I'm talking about something over in Cairo. No, this is not Egypt. This is Colorado pyramid. It's a peak. It's a 14er here, and it's a really tough one. It's a dangerous peak, one of the more dangerous. It's just that when I climbed pyramid, something happened that kind of became an allegory for life for me sometimes. So we came over a high, steep shoulder of this mountain and kind of went around the edge of the mountain. And we had to cross over this kind of airy ledge where it was just a vast drop down. And it, you know, got my attention. I'll say that much.
Oh my
You start thinking
gosh.
in terms of life and death, because one misstep and life is over. So we cleared that ledge, and then we entered into the final approach to the summit. And I don't know how long it is, maybe 1,000 feet, maybe 1,500 feet. It was a good distance, vertical feet. And as you look up, there are a series of cliffs with heaps of loose rocks on top of these cliffs, just like giant steps, right, covered with loose rocks. But as you look up, there's no evidence of a path. There's no way forward. It just looks terrifying. Matter of fact, we were in this location, and some mountain goats started a rock slide, and boulders came tumbling down very near to us. Luckily, they didn't hit us. And I was like, holy cow, I never thought I would die because a mountain goat kicked a rock. But it was just very unnerving. And I remember looking up,
Oh.
and all I could see were cliffs, no path forward, no route. I didn't know what to do. But we decided that we would just take each little cliff one at a time. And as we would summit one little cliff, we'd say, oh, here's a path through the rocks. And then we would climb higher and higher. And each step of the way, we couldn't see where we were supposed to go until we got up the cliff. And then when we got to the top, I turned around and I looked down, and I was amazed, because looking down, you could clearly see not one route, but many routes up the cliffs, because you could see where people had traveled, and mountain goats, and pushed aside the rocks and made a way forward. So the moral of that story is, in life or death situations, hindsight's 20/20, but our foresight may not be so great.
Right. Yeah.
Life is like that. It's often very foggy. We don't always get a clear view of the directions that we have to go. So here I am saying that there are ways that lead to life and there are ways that lead to death. And it sounds so simple and binary, but it's not. I recognize that. But the paradigm still fits. It's still a very useful and pragmatic tool that we can use to try to sort out how to live a better life. And that's the goal. How can we live a better life? In the previous episode, we talked a lot about deception and that the ways of death often look very appealing.
Mm.
And, you know, that's the hard part of this whole thing. I think it's not as difficult to see the ways that lead to life, but to decide if a way is a way of death or a way of life when it's actually a way of death can be very difficult. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Lydia. When you're looking at a decision in life and you're unsure, what kind of tools do you use to determine if this is a way of death or not?
Well, I haven't always been 100% right with this. I have learned a lot from my mistakes, but a lot of times I look at something long term. It's kind of that aspect of taking care of my future self. If I make this decision now, is that going to lead to more light and more life in my future?
Hmm.
And maybe if I'm torn about whether or not something would be good in my life long term, then I a lot of times just try to meditate on it and think about it and um kind of get my gut feeling about it because a lot of times, well, not not a lot of times, every single time I've listened to my gut, it's been correct.
Wow.
And I don't always listen to my gut, which is why I have made mistakes in the past. But
You must have a
the
wise
other
gut.
I do, yes, yes. It's a really good one. Um, but I would say that the other thing that I do as well is I just think, okay, well, does this decision have the potential to add more order into my life or more chaos?
Hmm. Yeah.
And that has helped me a lot as well because something might seem really life-giving, but it also has the potential to add a lot of chaos. And looking back at those decisions and deciding not to do that thing that could have potentially been a good thing, but also just was causing a lot of potential chaos as well, that has led to having a really good decision to not follow that path. So, what are your thoughts?
I have another metaphor. If you're an archer and you're looking at a target, you're aiming at a target, then it is imperative that you look behind your target, look beyond the target. The reason it's imperative is that you might miss, and whatever is behind the target is going to get hit, and you don't want to hit the wrong thing, right? It's a
Right,
life safety issue. But you can also shoot right through the target. I mean, that happens too. But as an archer, you quickly learn. Or if you're shooting a gun, same thing. Look behind your target. Make
right,
sure that if you miss, what's right there in your face saying, "Hey, look at me." If you miss that, misjudge it somehow, that it's still going to be okay.
right,
Um, Here's an example that is pretty obvious. It's easy because we all face it every day. Diet, right? We have a choice of foods. Maybe we're at some smorgasbord and you can decide to eat foods that you know are good for your long-term health. You can also decide to eat foods that are horrible for your long-term health. And okay, celebration food every now and then is great. I'm not saying, the be legalistic about your diet. What I am saying is that if you always grab the new shiny thing, the most appealing thing, that dessert, and that's all you ever do, then those are ways of death. You know,
Mm,
that leads to, I'm just going to ahead and say it all: obesity, heart disease, cancer, stroke, high blood pressure, diabetes. So
right.
sometimes
Yeah.
that dessert looks very, very appealing in the short term, but you don't have to even look 20 years down the road for this to work. If you eat too much sweet junk, how does it make you feel?
Horrible. Real
You feel
bad.
sick, right? I mean, it feels energizing and exciting at first, and then you get a sugar crash, your stomach's upset, you're shaky, you're looking for some solid food or something because your body got empty calories and didn't know what to do, and it put you in a state of dis-ease, right? So
Right.
even if we just look a little beyond our target, sometimes that's enough. One more example: that last beer. That last beer looks so appealing. I want just one more. But if you can look past that last beer to safety, to not getting thrown in jail, to not having a hangover the next day, toward choosing health over pleasure, at that point, you're going to make a better decision. Look
Right.
past that
Yeah.
last beer, right? How does it feel in the morning when your head is pounding, your stomach's upset, and you want to puke your guts out? Think about that instead of how that good that beer looks.
Right. Yep. Wise words.
Well, anyway, I think that looking past our target really helps us to discern between the ways of life and the ways of death. But still, it is deceiving. And, if you follow the ways of death far enough, quite often you end up in a state called nihilism. And nihilists get to the point that they believe that life has no meaning and it's not worth living. Maybe that humans have no value. Maybe they really do think that humans are just a parasite and that they need to be destroyed. Nihilism leads often, not always, but extreme nihilism leads to suicide. It leads to mass murders. It leads to living lives of utter depression. That's the ways of death. That's what I'm talking about. If your life choices are leading you in that direction, maybe it's time to put on the brakes. Maybe it's a time to consider some alternatives. There are many ways that seem so appealing, that seem so right, that are actually ways of death.
Yeah. That's really true. So how do we discern that? How do we start living a better life? How do we how do we live in the light?
You talked about your gut, and often our gut can really help us, just like you described. But I've had times in my life where I was numbed out. I didn't feel anything. But we've spoken in previous episodes of something that I like to call our higher consciousness. I believe it's the human spirit, the observer, the watcher.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tap into that higher wisdom that is inside of you, that is you, and you can be really honest with yourself, I think it usually pierces through the darkness and we begin to see the light. Another way to judge whether or not your decision is a good decision or a way of death is to look carefully with your higher self. Are you making excuses for your behavior? If you feel like you need to make excuses for it, What are you doing?
Right.
Right? Here's another one. Are you trying to balance guilt? Maybe it's not excuses. Maybe instead it's, well, I'll do this bad thing, but I'll do this good thing to make up for it. Or I know it sounds bad, but actually, that was so wrong. I just have to do this to get back at them because that would be justice somehow. Right.
Mm. Yeah.
When you start trying to balance your guilt, that's another indication that you are meddling with the ways of death. Um, Defense mechanisms. We've talked about those on prior episodes. But when you start telling yourself lies, right, so that you can better cope with, well, really cognitive dissonance, that's a really big indication that you've got some ways of death in your life, that that's not the best option. You're doing things that are causing you to have to lie to yourself. If you're lying to
Mm.
yourself, that's definitely not the ways of life, because the ways of life are true and good and life-giving. They're not
Right.
deception.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. And with that too, it's not just on you. You know, I've heard a lot of people say this, I'm sure that you have too, but several studies have shown that we're the culmination of the five people that we hang out with the most.
Mm, yep.
So if you're hanging out with people who are life-giving, that are pursuing light and love and health and true deep community where you can support one another and hold each other accountable when you need to, that is also super helpful because when you're numb and you can't really discern what is right and what's wrong, that's when you can reach out to your community and you can say, hey, here's this thing. What do you think? You know, it's awesome to be able to have trusted people like that in your life that can help you stay on that life-giving path.
Absolutely. The opposite, though, is also true. If you look at the people that you spend your time with, look over an extended period of time, like since you met them, how have you changed? Have the changes
Ooh.
been positive
Mm.
in your life? Did you do things you didn't want to do? Did you change your viewpoint and start calling things that you once thought were bad? Did you start calling them good because of the influence of the group that you're in? Social pressures, new perspectives. Do your friends, do they laugh at discernment? Do they joke about doing unwise things? Do they make fun of people who are trying to make good decisions? Regretfully, if the answer to those questions is, yeah, my friends are kind of like that, then you probably are hanging out in a group that's not life giving. They're spiraling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You need friends that stand with integrity.
I want to describe another spiral, which is a way of death, because I think it's so important. Often people are countercultural because they are trying to make a statement of some sort. And it's not wrong to be counter to the culture. Like I said, the culture can improve, right? There are things that we need to fix, and that's good. That can be your life's purpose. That can be life giving. You can be one of the people that fix things. But there's another type of countercultural behavior, which is when you do something shocking to the culture because it makes you feel something. You get attention. Even if the attention's negative, you're like, oh, I got to rise out of that old lady. Or, oh, I showed that guy what for. He can't tell me what to do. But what happens is that when people begin to behave in a countercultural, shocking way, then the culture grows numb to it. And they might just label you as, oh, you're just this type of person. And then they don't value your opinions anymore. They blow you off. So what do you have to do? To get to the same level of shock factor, to get the same effect from the culture, you have to take a more extreme position, a more extreme expression of your countercultural behavior. That will elicit another shock. And again, you get attention, and maybe you feel for a little bit like you have a voice, but then the culture begins to ignore you again or numbs out to it, starts calling you normal. So you have to be more extreme. Okay, I don't need to go on with this. You see how the spiral develops?
Mm-hmm.
You keep doing more and more extreme things to get the same effect. You have to check out those extremes. Are they life giving? Are they creating anger and or are they creating love? You can shock the culture by being loving. You can shock the culture by being kind and generous when it expects you to be angry and hurtful. You can shock the culture in the opposite direction and feed into that culture life and love, generosity and kindness, compassion, wisdom, truth. You can do that too.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see. And I just want to encourage our listeners too that and our viewers that love and light is pretty darn powerful. A lot of people think that you can only fight fire with fire. If people are being evil, then you have to take revenge. But it's a lot more powerful to be loving towards those people. And love is contagious, love spreads.
Yes, 100%. That's a beautiful place to wrap this up, Lydia. That's a beautiful truth. And, the College of Valor is about having the guts to make wise decisions and to live that better life every day so that your future life can be better and better and the lives of those around you can be better. There is a way that leads to life. You know, there's also a
Yep.
way that seems right that leads to death, and it requires discernment. But we're all about living that better life. So thank you very much for being with us today, for listening. Thanks for the comments that you leave that help us to understand and to learn and to grow too. Please do that. And if you know people who you think might enjoy some food for thought, something to chew on for a while that they could get from College of Valor, then please share. Please share College of Valor with them. Our goal is to give people ideas to think about. We're not going to try to tell you exactly how you're supposed to live. Rather, we just want to empower you to make better life decisions.
Mm, I love that. Absolutely. Well, we love you guys and thanks for tuning in.
All right. We'll see you next time.